Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this wonderful session that's about to occur with our presenter, Brielle Erike. Brielle is going to talk about designing for deep learning, equity strategies for online instruction. I want to remind you that if you need captioning, please select the link down at the bottom of your Zoom screen because that is available. And the recording of this session will be available in about a week or so. I believe a notice will go out about that. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. And take it away, Brielle.
Thank you so much, Adoria, and thank you all for being here today. I am so excited to talk with you all over your lunch hour. I hope you're snacking on something good, and I hope that you've enjoyed the presentations today so far. I know I certainly have. It's already been a jam-packed morning, and we're just halfway through the first day. So, thank you for spending a little time with me. And I want to jump into this. So, my name is Brielle Erike, and I am a communication studies faculty member across the community college system in California, and I'm an instructional designer as well. And it's my absolute honor to be speaking with you all this afternoon for a couple of reasons. One is under a decade ago, when I decided to go back into teaching, Peralta was one of the first districts to hire me. So it's really excited to be representing them today. And the first year that they held the Online Equity Conference was probably my first time presenting, not just as faculty, but as an ID. And then finally, I'm from Oakland. So it's just so great to be in this space with you all. And I'm just grateful that we have the opportunity to discuss some things that have been on my mind recently, some strategies that I think will, or I hope will supplement your work in whatever context you're coming at this conference from today. So I'll share that, as someone who's been working with faculty, and in the space of faculty development for online learning for a while, I've seen that most instructors, a lot of instructors really, really care about equity. I've led trainings on topics that have seemingly nothing to do with equity. It's not in the title, it's not in the learning objectives, but it always comes up because it's something that not only does everyone care about, but everyone should care about because it's always and should always be a factor in how we design learning spaces. And I find that sometimes people don't know that they're asking a question about equity or presenting a strategy that lends itself to equity because it really does touch so much of what we do. And that's why you're all here, because you know that it matters. And we're not going to spend today talking about why it matters, because you already know that that is why you came to this conference today. What I'm here, I hope, to help ask or consider is how are educators possibly unknowingly actually perpetuating inequities in their classroom? Sit with that for a second. How might you be actually working against equity in ways that you didn't intend to, that you aren't quite sure how to remedy? And of course, maybe there's blind spots, right? We all have them. And I'll be honest, I like changed the title of this many, many times. My deck has even changed just in the last few hours. So I am going to be relying on my speaker notes to help guide this conversation because I think there's a lot of ways we can approach that question, a lot of strategies we could talk about. But for today's purposes, I just want you to kind of sit back and think about what are some of the practices that you do and how might you rethink rigor and challenging your students in the name of equity. Like I said, I see that a lot of online faculty struggle with designing for equity, not because they're afraid to elevate the floor, but because they're actually lowering the ceiling at the same time. All right, what do I mean by that? So, um, early in my career, and still today, I speak with faculty that are longing to support their students, and they do so by simplifying their course. They reduce reading load and offer multi-platform, learning content. They shorten assignments and submission requirements. They make discussions more structured with specific word counts. Everything that sounds supportive, right? But what this does is allow students to complete more while actually learning less. Their work becomes more surface level, their engagement drops, and the focus becomes more on performance rather than mastery. And this happens all the time in the name of equity and accessibility. And as teachers and instructional designers, we are all, often really well-intentioned, but we're part of the problem when we design in this manner. We have those checklists, like the peer online course review checklist, right? And you're like, okay, do I have alt text on my images? Did I update my headers? Are they in subordinate sequence? But that's helping with accessibility, and access is not equity. If you've ever noticed a student asking, is this being graded or does this count? This reflects environments where students have learned that success is about points, not thinking. And that is not a student problem. It's an instructional design problem. And if students who are historically disadvantaged can pass classes by just earning points and not thinking, then it becomes an equity problem. So this has been clicking for me a lot lately. I'm pursuing a doctorate in education with an emphasis in education psychology. And through a combination of that new exposure and literature that I'm getting exposed to and my own experiences in the classroom for over a decade, and leading professional development for faculty, I've realized that sometimes what looks like support is actually a reduction in intellectual opportunity. So that's where this idea of equitable rigor came forth to me, and really started to take shape for me. So my goal today is to help you raise the floor rather than lower the ceiling. And what that really means is I want to help you increase support so more students can reach high levels of learning, not reduce the level of challenge, complexity, or the depth expected. And my typical style is to be very interactive, but because this is sort of a new way of sort of providing information that I've talked about for years, but in a new package, I won't be able to pause for interaction quite as much, but I do want to invite you to put questions in the chat. My colleague Adoria will be answering, and we'll hopefully have time at the end to cover more questions and maybe even dig into some of your own examples. So let's start with some definitions and things. Throughout my presentation, I will ground my ideas in strategies and research. And I want to start by noting again that despite good intentions, diverse student populations are often unintentionally offered less complex, less challenging, and more rote learning experiences. And again, all of this is done in the name of equity. But what equity requires access to deep learning, it's not just about giving students what they need when they need it. That's like the broad definition, right? We want to take it a step further and not just, again, give people access, but really think about how are we pushing students to reach their full potential and expecting that from our students. And as was noted in the earlier opening session from Chancellor Gilkerson, AI can do a lot of the rote thinking that we're used to designing for and often embedded in our courses and our quizzes, especially, right? But as she questioned, if AI can do the assignment, then what is the point of the assignment, right? So I want us to think about how we design assignments, not for completion, but for challenge, for critical thinking. And this is where equitable rigor comes in. So, equitable rigor, when I'm using this term throughout today, it really means providing intellectually challenging learning opportunities for all students while also offering the supports necessary for success. I want to tell you a couple of things equity rigor doesn't mean. It does not mean lowering expectations. It doesn't mean making things hard for no reason. It doesn't mean confusing or unrealistic, complex tasks. It doesn't mean testing on things you didn't teach or demonstrate. It doesn't mean assuming more than you explain. And it certainly doesn't mean ignoring cognitive overload or time constraints, because all of those things are really real. And I think sometimes when we think about rigor, we think about things that are just like kind of hard just to be hard. And that's not the point. The point is to support students in achieving, again, mastery over performance. Equity rigor means ensuring all students have access to the deep learning. And so, what is deep learning? Well, deep learning is expanding cognitive capacity, and it should be the goal of higher education. Education should focus on creating environments where students can engage deeply with ideas rather than simply recalling information. Easier said than done. So I'm going to now provide four strategies that I want to introduce, again, coming from this framework of like academic rigor and ed psych. Um, and I want to note that these four strategies displayed for you here are all rooted in research. And it's not an exhaustive list by any means. The strategies are not mutually exclusive, right? There's going to be overlap. Many of the examples I give will work across multiple strategies and multiple methods. But I think it's still helpful to kind of think about them in this compartmentalized way, which is why I've broken them up. And if you were in attendance this morning for Dr. Newton's opening remarks, or just a few hours ago, Dr. Finch talked about coaching as a teaching tool, this is going to feel all very aligned with that. And if you're familiar with culturally responsive pedagogy or the Peralta Online Equity Rubric or the IDEA framework for OER or Universal Design for Learning, this is all going to be related. And really, what I'm trying to do is kind of lift the hood on some of those frameworks that we've all heard about and we practice, but we're still not meeting our equity goals, right? So, why is that? What's really behind those strategies? And if nothing else, I hope that I can provide just some questions to ask yourself that can kind of guide you and be your North Star whenever you're next developing or updating online learning material. All right, let's jump in. So, first strategy, the focus is what students are learning, and the method is to name the types of knowledge students are building. The main idea here is that you tell students what you are doing and remove the mystery and the aha moment you're trying to get them to have at the end, and talk them through your planning and thinking process instead of having some big reveal. So it goes beyond sharing an agenda or a rubric. Those are things that are definitely important in transparent teaching and making sure students know, like, what are we going to learn today and how am I going to be assessed? This instead asks teachers to go further and explain to their students that all learning and teaching are rooted in four different types of knowledge. We often teach two or three of these, sometimes even just one, in a typical lecture style. But the goal is really to teach each one and tell each student when you're teaching from that, with that knowledge type in mind, and integrate all four. Okay, so what are the four? This is not going to be surprising, right? But think about this as a framework. Four types of learning. We've got factual learning, the terms and definitions and basic information of your concept of your discipline. Concepts, so that's more about the relationship between the facts. Procedural learning, which is processes, right? This is like a very obvious when you think about a lot of the STEM sciences, but even in the humanities and liberal arts, we've got processes in place. And then the metacognitive, right? This is your self-reflection and students being able to kind of assess and manage their own learning. And that is a knowledge type. And we want to tap into that. I like to think of these four as a recipe. So facts are the ingredients. Concepts are things like boiling, sauteing, blending. Procedures are doing those things in the proper order. And then the metacognitive is how did it taste? What did it feel like cooking? Right? Um, so not only is your goal to explain each one and when it's being used, but to employ all four and to empower your students to understand the difference so that they can apply the appropriate learning strategies and studying strategies for that type of knowledge. So, for example, you could tell them, hey, you have a formative assessment that's multiple choice with multiple attempts so that you know the facts, right? This is how I'm going to assess you on do you know the facts. Then you're going to have a project where you're going to take the concepts and build out a procedure, right? That's your project. And you're also going to have a pre and post reflection before and after your project, where I'm going to assist you with metacognition. I'm going to help you with goal planning in part one and then evaluation in part two. Tell them this, right? It's not enough to scaffold. You've got to tell students why you've scaffolded. What is the point of each layer of the assignment? And you're empowering them in so many ways when you do this. You're giving them new knowledge. You're also empowering them to be sort of co-collaborators in the learning construction, because I guarantee you, if you break things down like this, students, in their brilliance are going to have ideas that contribute to how you do this even more and even better in the future. They're going to think about reflection prompts you never thought of, ways of going about things that you never thought of when they're invited into the conversation. It's also a great strategy to introduce students to when you're talking about AI. Um, and especially if you're giving them permission to use AI, you can really do so thinking about what part of the learning process, what knowledge type is best used for AI in order for them to still meet the learning objectives as independent learners. So you can talk to them about the learning objective as, if the learning objective is factual or conceptual, procedural, metacognitive, you can tell them for which type related task they can or cannot use AI. So a more concrete example, I teach public speaking, and I might say, hey, so you can use AI to help you build your slide deck because your slide deck's just a bunch of facts anyway. What you need to practice is your delivery. And what you need to do on your own is your reflection, because that's the learning objectives tied to this assignment, right? So I'm giving them that permission, like, okay, yeah, you can use AI, spruce up your slide deck. But here's where the actual learning needs to occur, and it needs to be driven by you. This is super empowering for our students. And I thought of another example in the communication studies sort of frame. The transactional model of communication is something we teach like week one. This is another opportunity to introduce the four types of learning. So if I was giving this lecture, I wouldn't just explain, the model and just throw them a picture. I would say the factual elements are, the key components of the model, encoding and decoding. The conceptual elements are understanding that communication is two or more people, right? I say these words to them. The procedural elements of the model, we're actually going to practice those in real time, right? Let's think about how we encode and decode simultaneously, right? And how that is actually a simultaneous process that's going on continuously all day. And metacognitively, I want you all to reflect on your personal communication patterns. How does your, field of experience influence how you communicate? How would you put that in this model? Right? I'm introducing a key theory and I'm breaking down when am I talking about a fact? When am I talking about a concept? So they can start to build those connections. And that's going to support in knowledge transfer in other subjects. Next, when they go to their next class, when they go to biology, they're going to be looking for facts. They're going to be looking for concepts. They're going to be looking for procedures, and they're going to be doing metacognition because they've now been introduced to that language. So it's almost like teaching your students how you would train another teacher to design an assignment, right? Just bringing them into that conversation. And I promise you they can handle it and it will be so helpful to them across subjects. So why this matters for equity, we've kind of covered this, right? We know students don't all arrive to our classrooms with the same experience or the same exposure when it comes to academic language, when it comes to studying strategies, or maybe they've never even been asked to do a reflection, right? We want to level that playing field and elevate all students to have that common language, understand how they're learning and what they're learning together. Um, and I will be happy to share my slide deck after because I won't be able to cover every detail here. But hopefully you can catch it and take screenshots and email me for a copy. I'm happy to give you that. But I do want to move on to our next strategy because we've got three more to cover. So next is I want to encourage us all as educators to focus on how learning happens. And one theory that has really been inspiring to me recently is the social cognitive theory. It's something I'm sure has come across your desk at one point or another, but just as a refresher, the social cognitive theory developed by Bandura helps us understand that learning doesn't happen in isolation, right? You see this every day in your classrooms. Learning happens due to interactions between the environment, beliefs, and behavior. In other words, students aren't just processing content, they're constantly asking themselves, do I belong here? Can I succeed here? Is this for someone like me? And those beliefs really shape how they participate and how much effort they put in and what they expect to learn. So, a key concept in this model is self-efficacy. That's the students' belief in their ability to succeed. It's different than confidence because self-efficacy is more specific to a specific task. You can be a confident human, but your self-efficacy in math is low, right? We want to build self-efficacy in all our subject areas. And so much of the social cognitive theory can help us think about how we do that. Because when students believe they can succeed, they persist longer, they engage more deeply, and they perform better. When they don't, they'll disengage, often regardless of their ability, just because they don't think that they're supposed to be where they are. So, from an equity perspective, this matters a ton because not all students experience learning environments in the same way. Signals about belonging, expectations, feedback, and others really reinforce or undermine their confidence. So, equitable course design isn't just about what we teach, it's about how we design environments that build belief. Because if students don't believe they could succeed, deep learning doesn't happen. They go back to performance as opposed to thinking about mastery. They're just trying to get the passing grade to get to the next thing. And again, it's a three-pronged theory, and I want to double click on environment. I mean, you already see where I'm going with this, I hope. But students interpret learning environments through lots of different cues, right? That shape their motivation and experience. However, when social cognitive theory and within social cognitive theory and the environment, we know that one of the one of the clearest ways we can see the relationship between environment and learning is stereotype threat. So stereotype threat occurs when a student is aware of negative stereotypes about a group they belong to, and that awareness creates pressure not to confirm those stereotypes. There's a great book called Whistling Vivaldi that talks about this at length, highly recommend it. But the idea here is that that I want you to think about is how are your environments supporting or negating stereotype threat? In which ways might your environments and your students be experiencing stereotype threat just by being in the room? Because that pressure doesn't sit as background noise. It actually consumes cognitive resources and increases anxiety and can reduce performance. So from a social cognitive perspective, we know that learning environments we create as educators send signals, sometimes subtly, sometimes very overtly, about who belongs and who is expected to succeed and what competence looks like. So students interpret these signals and those interpretations shape what they do next. So if an environment triggers a stereotype threat, it can lower that self-efficacy we talked about and change their behavior. And that's why equitable design matters so much. We have to be intentional about creating those environments that normalize challenge. Tell students, hey, you're going to get to this point and you're going to want to go to ChatGPT. You're going to want to go to Claude. Don't. Here's why. You all feel this way. So let's figure out how we're going to get through this step together, right? Highlight diverse ways of succeeding, right? Tell students, okay, so here's the 5 different parts of the rubric. They all matter, and you're excelling at 3 of them, and that is fantastic. Let's talk about the other 2. Or tell me what's challenging you in this department, right? Highlight that success and know that success can show up in different ways, right? Give them the language and the insight into that, as opposed to having some sort of one size fits all model, are looking at the overall grade rather than breaking down, okay, within this rubric, where am I excelling and where can I, perform better? So, in summary, some ways we can reduce stereotype threat and create conditions where all students want to engage. We can offer multimedia learning, right? So some students know they're not going to capture it through lecture. So you know that you've also got a text, you've got a video, you've got a podcast, you've got art, you've got film, you've got different things you can lean on to support them. Providing options for assignment prompts and submission types. So students know, okay, I'm better at public speaking. I'm not great with essays. Okay, I have an option here. I'm going to do the public speaking option, right? Also, elevating diverse perspectives so students can see themselves reflected in expertise. So this is not just having diverse opinions on page, it's actually showing them the diversity through those visuals that we talked about. So videos and audio and podcasts and things like that. TED Talks are fantastic if you want to bring more diverse voices to the table. Um, Also, giving multiple attempts on a quiz and treating it as formative rather than summative. Some students have a lot of test anxiety, and it comes from stereotypes that are specific to their identity. You can take that, you can remove that completely from the occasion by saying, hey, you don't just get one attempt, because this isn't about you getting it the first time. This is about you learning what you don't understand and what you do understand, right? So you take that pressure of one time only off and give them multiple attempts with feedback. Come back to that later. And then allowing for makeups and redos and having flexible due dates. Now, I know this is all can be very time consuming and is it's much easier said than done. But it's definitely worth it. If you want quality work and you want to be able to offer rigorous critical thinking tasks, you need to be flexible, right? And we need to appreciate that different students are facing those different challenges and they need different support. And all of these options, they're all very universal design for learning related, right? All of these things can help mitigate that stereotype threat without students having to disclose to you what is actually threatening to them. And I was thinking of it, how this relates to me. I'm a mom of 2. And if I have to ask my teacher for an extension because my kid is sick, now for the rest of the semester, I'm going to be worried that they think I'm tired and they think I'm just doing the bare minimum, because that is a stereotype of a working parent, right? But if I know from the get-go that I've got a 2-day grace period, right? Or I can turn something in late and it's only going to reduce my grade by 10%. It's still worth submitting, right? Then I don't have to go and self-disclose that. I don't have to worry about that stereotype threat, and I don't have to feel uncomfortable as a student parent, which many of our students are, especially in the community college space. So again, I'm trying to click to the next slide. Happy to share these slides with you to go more in depth, but I want to make sure I get to my final 2 strategies before we run out of time. So strategy number 3, how learning is measured. We've touched on this a bunch, but let's dive in. The method is to assess for learning rather than of learning. So through the different examples I've given you about formative assessments, the key thing to think about is that we want to move from measuring performance to supporting learning in progress. In practice, they can look like low stakes quizzes, which I just talked about, right? Multiple choice or multiple attempts. Giving immediate feedback whenever possible. So oral exams where you can tell people right away, like, oh, here's what you're doing great. Keep doing this, right? Write a little note to give to them privately about things that they can, really grow on. Scaffolding assignments, we talked about that. But that's really helping students build toward a final product and they get feedback along the way. And by the time you get to the end of the semester, it's just like, oh yeah, hey, you've been implementing the feedback. It makes your life easier. It makes them succeed. It's all good. And structured opportunities for revision where feedback is actually used to improve, right? So that's part of the scaffolding idea of building towards a product. And this approach doesn't just elevate, this approach is not just about evaluating students, it's about helping them develop over time. From an equity perspective, this matters a lot because it creates more opportunity for the student to practice, to adjust, and to succeed rather than being defined by this single high stakes moment. So, again, assessment for learning, not of learning. And here's some more sort of implications as it relates to equity. And I want to note when it comes to quizzes and feedback, some really important things to try and implement if you're able to do so. I know in the online space, this comes down to your learning management system in many ways, but you want to have quizzes where there's responsive feedback. So quizzes cannot just be about checking for completion and passing a grade. They have to be designed to surface knowledge gaps and enhance study and preparation approaches. When students answer questions and immediately see where they're off track, they can adjust in real time. And you should build that time into your process. So a lot of times we give quizzes, they give a grade, move on to the next unit. Maybe spend some time post quiz talking through some of the questions that a lot of people missed as a class, right? We don't want to assume students are using that feedback. We want to make sure we give them the feedback that we hope that they're getting in that online experience whenever we are able to meet with them live. Excuse me, when they're getting the asynchronous experience, whenever we're able to meet with them live or synchronously. You can also discover a lot of patterns when you go back and look at the data, right? And you can see where some individuals might need more support in going over a concept, or maybe the entire class is struggling in one particular area. That should inform how you move forward in the class as a teacher. And then, of course, the feedback is really key. So you want to give specific targeted feedback that helps student understand why something works, not just whether or not it's correct. Because sometimes students get correct, maybe again, they're using a tool, something in the AI space, or maybe they got lucky, right? If it's multiple choice, they just guessed. You want to help them understand why it was right. And maybe they got it right because they understand one reason why, but maybe there's probably a lot more to that, or how this is going to apply to future concepts, right? Connect those dots for students through your feedback. Um, and it's also an opportunity to acknowledge effort. So I deal with this a lot where I have students, pour out these huge, essays to me of their speeches, and I asked for an outline, right? And so I have to dock some points because what they've provided me is an essay of what they want to say, but not an outline. But I want to give them points and kudos for all the work they put into this product. That's not exactly what I asked for, and I'm going to tell them why. But acknowledging the effort is really something that can save a student from giving up, from feeling like they're less than, or they don't belong, or they're not ready, and that imposter syndrome that really creeps in often for our underrepresented students. There's a quote that I read in an article this year that I think of every time a student reaches out to me, wanting an extension or needing extra time. And the quote is, educators are either engaged in incarceration prevention or incarceration expansion. And I really think about that when I go into grade and I think about assessment and whether or not I'm signaling to a student, keep going, or am I signaling to a student, maybe unintentionally, hey, you're not meeting the mark, right? Keep going is a much more positive message. It's going to keep that student enrolled so that they continue with their degree or pursue whatever path they're looking to achieve, right? So you got to give them the grade, but you also can give them feedback that supports them and moving on to the next assignment and building on that to get a higher grade, right? We want to think about both. So the real point here is that together responsive quizzes and feedback can create continuous learning loops, right? And can really support students in succeeding. All right, I'm looking at the time. We got to move on to the last strategy, which, we got to talk about AI. There's just no way not to. And it's a good thing, right? Learning is evolving. And as teachers, it's really important for us and administrators at all levels of education to evolve with it, right? So we know AI gives many, but not all, a major advantage in aspects of academic life. But all of our underrepresented students really need our guidance on AI in order to stay competitive, right? Their peers and people they're going up against in the job market are using AI. We want our students to feel competitive entering the market where we know AI is part of the conversation, it's part of the responsibility. We want to build self-efficacy. We don't want students out using AI and not they don't know how to use it, but also they know they don't know how to use it. They know that there's other tools out there, right? We want them to be confident in saying, okay, I know how to intelligently think about what tool to use and when to use it, which goes into being critical of AI, right? And ethical use of AI. We want to give students that knowledge and that framework and those guardrails to think about how artificial intelligence is impacting certain fields, when it's okay to use, when you shouldn't use it, how other people are using it, and be in the know. And we want students to stay enrolled, right? We know that because of AI, people are starting to question the value of formal education. And that is just so sad because there's so much to be gained here when we take the mastery lens, not the performance lens. And AI is a performance tool, it's not a mastery tool. That's not to say we can't learn from it, right? But we need to break down those nuances for our students and help them be a human in the loop. I learned that this morning from Dr. Newton. I never heard that term before, human in the loop. We really want to empower all of our students, particularly our underrepresented students, to be that human who's working with the AI. And that starts with us in the classrooms, particularly in higher education, where we can have the nuance and we can talk critically about these things. So, I mentioned in the very beginning of the presentation that a lot of times diverse student populations are not provided rigor and they're given rote tasks. Let's put the rote tasks on AI. Let's make that okay. Okay, you need help sort of, putting together this deck and the deck is not the learning objective. Fine, go for it, right? What we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at that deck and we're going to notice and we're going to critique what is it missing? What did it leave out? Oh, that's not APA, that's MLA. We told it APA, right? We can use the outputs of AI as teaching opportunities to support students in their prompt engineering, their critique of responses, comparing AI outputs, and of course, reflecting on AI's limitations and bias. These are all things we can do to elevate our students and challenge our students in our classrooms. So, some takeaways from these strategies. Deep learning emerges when it's intentionally designed for multiple knowledge types, supportive learning environments, meaningful assessment, and ethical engagement with new tools. AI is not the last tool out there. There's going to be more. So you want to have a process for yourself and how you talk about it. And remember that equity requires both challenge and support. And our goal is to move from transactional teaching to transformative learning. I want to open it up for some questions or get some feedback. And I also want to give you an opportunity to reflect on how some of these ideas can be implemented into your own course design strategies. Maybe thinking of one particular assignment where you want to level up, right? Think about how you're assessing that assignment. Think about what types of knowledge are you drawing on? Do your students know that language? How can you introduce it? And I want to thank you for your time today. I'm sorry I just blabbered, blabbered, blabbered. I really would love to hear your thoughts. If there's questions that came up, please elevate them, come off mic, or excuse me, come off mute, and I'd be happy to engage.
That was wonderful. And I know people have questions. So come on, folks.
Yay!
Throw them out there. You can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
Let's get into it. I could talk about this stuff all day. I had to hold back, y'all. I had to hold back. There's so much to think about when it comes to designing for equity with rigor, right? The literature tells us students are smart, right? Half the time they're checked out because they've gotten bored. How can we stimulate them? Oh, we got a hand raised. Go for it.
Well, I have a quick question. I love everything you said, and I typically practice assignments that are more doing. But at the same time, I've noticed that some students are more grade focused than process focused, and really getting something out of the journey, uh,
Yeah.
despite my best efforts to innovate. And so I guess my question to you is, why do you recommend to help students with get into a mind shift to more, process and critical thinking rather than a focus on the end goal?
Yeah, it's one of those challenges that I think we all face every day, and it looks a little different. One solution, though, that does come to mind, or it's definitely not a solution, but an opportunity that I think about is starting in the very beginning of the class with why are you here? Right? And reminding students of that why. And if you can connect every assignment to their individual whys, you're not going to remember it for all 30 or 40 or however many are in your class, but you're going to remember a few and you're going to say, oh, hey, Enrique, remember how you said you want to do this? Well, this directly applies to the task you need to get there, right? You build off of what is we know is true for them as a motivation to be in school and to graduate and to get the job or get the next degree and try to embed that into assignments. And there's ways to do that sort of more generally too. In public speaking, one of my assignments for students is they go out and they interview someone who works in the career path that they see themselves on. And then we build on that interview with a couple of other assignments where they can tailor what I'm asking them to do to that job, to that interview, to that organization where they want to go get employment. It makes things a little bit harder for me on the rubric side of things, but it's so worth it.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, it's tricky. But yeah, making it relevant to the individual students and their journey. Thank you all so much for being here. Please hang, ask questions. I really appreciate the comments that are coming through. English and writing. Advice do you have when it comes to AI? Ooh, I have some advice, but it's like it's not tip of the tongue. I've got resources. I'll put my email in the chat because I think there's a lot that can be supportive in all disciplines and it really is tailored to them. So with English specifically, I'd love for you to reach out. I can see what I can pull for you. I have been asked to be part of a lot of AI policy building, and my number one go-to is like, okay, the AI policy just needs to be have one. And then we need to work with each individual department and teacher and think more specifically about that because there's different tools for different subject areas. There's different assignments that are going to allow, again, AI in one place, but not in another. And we got to break it down. And it's time consuming. But as my friend Dr. Finch said earlier, like, let's level up. This is our work. These are our students. This is their future. So it's worth every teacher having their own policy. You just got to have one. That's really the big point. And you got to be transparent. I meant to cover that earlier because when we model, it's okay to use AI. Here's where I did. Students are going to be more transparent and we can catch if there's misuse, right? So, modeling, tailored policies, I'm really in favor of all of that.
Wow, thank you so much. This was excellent. So good job, my friend.
Yay.
Good job. I knew you would do an excellent job, and you did.
Thank you,
Everybody, thank
Victoria.
you for coming. Brielle did put her email address in the chat. It's Plump, Plump at peralta.edu. Email her if you have questions. She is awesome. And like I said before, the slides and the recording will be made available soon. So we might send out an email about that, I believe. So
Mm.
keep your eyes open. And thank you for participating today in the Equity Conference. And we appreciate you.
Thank you all so much.